everybody. Well, this week I'm going to answer all of your most pressing questions that you guys have asked in the comments, so you're not going to want to miss it. We're Dooglass and Esperanza, and we decided to leave our lives in the U.S., sell almost everything we own, and move to Baja California Sur, where we decided to start a resort in the magical town of Loreto, Mexico. Please come with us to follow our journey and live before you die. I get tons of comments on all of the videos, and I thank you guys for commenting. I get so much great information from the comments, and I try to respond to every single comment, and there's some comments that come up again and again and again. So I thought it'd be great to do a video where I answered all of the questions that you guys have for us. So let's get straight to it. Now, I do have a script here. It's an outline of all the different questions, so I don't forget anything or any of the details. Now, before I start, I want to say, don't take any of this as advice or financial advice or legal advice. I'm just going from our experience here in Loreto, Mexico. The first thing I have on my list, can I get Amazon delivered in Mexico? And yes, you can get Amazon delivered in Mexico, at least where we are in Loreto, Mexico. And there are two different Amazon options. There's US Amazon and Amazon Mexico. Now, usually you can get both to deliver. We've used both of them. On high ticket items, I like to check both Amazon Mexico and Amazon US for the same item, because many times Amazon US will be cheaper than Amazon Mexico. Then there's Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime on your US account does not do anything in Mexico, so you don't get any advantage of it. Amazon Prime Mexico, which you can sign up for separately on your Amazon Prime Mexico, that will give you free shipping of most products here, and it's definitely worth it. We pay 99 pesos a month, which is like $6, and for $6 you get no shipping on 95% of the products, which a lot of times that can be a lot. I've seen $15, $20, $25 shipping charges on certain products. How long does it take to get here? Well, normally it's going to be about 2 weeks for any products to get here because they're coming from the US. They do have a small warehouse here in La Paz. If the product is in that warehouse in La Paz, you usually get it within 3 to 4 days. Now, there is another option that we use a lot here. It's called Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre is like the Latin American version of Amazon. It's a direct competitor. It's basically the exact same thing. They have 50, 60, 70% of the exact same products. And a lot of times the Mercado Libre prices are a little lower than the Amazon prices. And also, Mercado Libre has a bigger warehouse here in La Paz, so at least for us, there's a lot more items that we can get quicker. And if those products are at the Mercado Libre warehouse in La Paz, they usually get here in 2 to 3 days. Sometimes they even get here in 1 day. So that's a really good option also. Our next question, residency requirements. So Esperanza and I are residents of Mexico, and what this does is gives you the ability to come and go from Mexico without having to worry about anything. There's no paperwork to fill out. There's nothing. You just show your residency cards when you leave. You show your residency cards when you come back to Mexico, and that's about it. So you don't need a FMM, which is what they call the tourist visa. The biggest question about residency is, how do I get residency? What's the process? Well, it's very long and complicated. So the most used version of getting residency is that you go to a consulate in your home country, you start the process, and then you come to Mexico and finish the process in Mexico. Now, usually that process is by income or assets. So you have to have a minimum income or every month or a minimum amount of assets to qualify for residency through that process. Now, there are tons of other ways to get residency, tons of other processes you can use, and I don't even know of them all. So, if you're looking to get residency, you definitely need to do your research and figure out what the best way is for you. Next question is, what about the cost of living in Mexico? People think that it's really expensive in Mexico now. So, for starters, most of the people that I see in the comments that talk about the cost of living being high are comparing it to when they came 20 or 30 or 40 years ago and they came to Mexico, and they could get a taco for 5 cents, and then they come back 40 years later and they expect that it's still going to be 5 cents for a taco, which of course is not reasonable. Mexico has inflation just like every other country in the world, so they're not a time bubble that the prices are 1965 prices here for the rest of eternity. But the prices are generally less expensive here in Loreto, at least. So if you are buying products that are Mexican products, which I mean products that Mexicans use, services Mexicans use on a regular basis, then those products will tend to be 30%, 40% cheaper than in the US. If you are buying products or services that generally Mexicans don't use very much, like your barbecue sauce that you love from the US, or you're going to buy chlorine for your pool, which most Mexicans, at least in our area, don't have pools, those products are brought in from the US just for Americans and Canadians. Those products are going to be expensive. They're going to be the same price as the US or possibly even a little bit more because they have to be imported in. They have to pay an import tax on them. So if you want to live very inexpensively in Mexico, the way to do it is to live like a Mexican, to buy the stuff at the grocery store that the normal Mexicans would buy, to use the services that Mexicans would use. And if you do that, it is going to be very less expensive. Now, if you want to come to Mexico and live like you're living in Los Angeles with all the amenities that you have there, all the products that you can go to the grocery store and get there and everything else, you can get most of that down here, but you're going to pay for it. So that's kind of the trade-off. Now, restaurants are exactly the same thing. People will say, oh, I came to Loreto and the restaurants are really expensive, almost as much as the U.S. There are restaurants here that are almost as much as eating in a U.S. restaurant, but usually it's because they cater to Americans and Canadians, and the food that they have is not a food that Mexicans generally eat. And so, like, for example, there's a steakhouse here in town. It has USDA prime beef that they import from the U.S. for their steakhouse. And it is American prices. You may pay $75 for a good steak there. But you're getting a big cut of steak from the U.S. Down here, they eat flank steak, chopped up usually and used in fajitas or burritos or tacos or something like that. So they're not going to have a tomahawk steak normally, and that's why the prices are really high. Now, if I want to go get some awesome birria, which is like a pot roast beef that's cooked down in a crock pot overnight until it's very tender and just falls apart, they make birria tacos out of that. They're fantastic. I know places in town I can get those for 50 cents. I know places I can get those for about 30 cents a taco. And they're big enough that 3 tacos with all the toppings is what you need for a meal. So you can eat a good meal with good tacos for under $1 here. Or you can go to a steakhouse and get a $75 steak. It all depends what you're looking for. One of our biggest questions is, can a foreigner own property in Mexico? There's a lot of misconceptions around this. So I'm going to try to get this right. This is a complicated subject. There are lots of different types of property in Mexico, and there's lots of different ownership types in Mexico. So really quickly, the property types. There's titled property, which is titled property like the U.S. That's where you have a title of the property. It has been exhaustively researched to make sure that that title is clear, and that is the safest way to own property in Mexico. Then there's leased land. Leased land is where someone else owns the land. They let you build something on it, a house or a casita or something like that. And they give you usually a 10-year lease. I think 10 years is a maximum lease allowed in Mexico on any land. So they will give you a 10-year lease, and they will tell you that it's renewable forever. That renewable forever part is just the word of the person telling you, because per the law, that lease can only go for 10 years, and at the end of the 10 years, they can choose not to renew the lease, which means if you build a house on a leased land, there is the chance that somebody's going to come back at the end of the lease term and say, we're not going to renew the lease, you need to leave, and they get whatever you built there. That's the way it works. It's usually a much less expensive way to get a house down here because they charge much, much less for the property and because of the lease. So you can get into a house maybe 30-40% under what it would cost you if you bought the property. The next type of land that I know about is ejido land. And ejido land, which is E-J-I-D-O, ejido land is land that was originally owned communally and may still be owned communally. And these were land grants given by the Mexican government to Mexican citizens as a communal group. Usually they are farming lands, and it was given to a group of farmers to work the land and farm on it. And over time, they've developed a process where you can take chunks of that land, break it off, and eventually it can become titled land. But that process is very complicated. Americans cannot own ejido land, and so are Canadians, foreigners can't. And so if you are looking at a piece of ejido land, you need a very, very good attorney and a very good real estate agent. And you need to make sure you do all the work that's required to convert that ejido land to titled land before you can purchase it. We only looked at titled land. We didn't want to mess with anything else. A lot of foreigners, U.S. and Canadian people, will look at leased land. I would stay away from ejido land altogether. Okay. Owning land as a foreigner in Mexico. There is a restricted zone in Mexico. The restricted zone is 100 kilometers from any international border and 50 kilometers from any coastline. In that restricted zone, you cannot own land directly as a foreigner. That restricted zone encompasses all of Baja. So all of Baja is in it and all the coastline of Mexico. Now, the area of Mexico outside that restricted zone, you can own land directly as a foreigner and have your name on the title to the property, the deed to the property. So it's just like the U.S. in that case. You just directly buy the land, your name is on the title, and you own the land. Now, in the restricted zone, they have developed ways for foreigners to own land, even though they can't directly own land. So the first way is the most popular is a fideicomiso. Fideicomiso is called a Mexican bank trust. It's really not a trust, but it's a way that the bank holds the property for you. The property is legally held by the Mexican bank and it is held in your name for you. These have a term of usually 50 years and then they're indefinitely, I think, renewable. This has been a very secure process for foreigners to buy land in Mexico. I've really not heard of anybody that has a legitimate fideicomiso ever losing their property or having any problems with it. So a lot of people choose to do this. The cost is, there's an upfront cost to set up the fideicomiso, and then there's a maintenance cost every year. The other way to own land in Mexico is the way we have done it, and that's to form a Mexican corporation. This has changed over the years. It used to work differently, but how it works now is as a foreigner, you can form a Mexican corporation, and a Mexican corporation can be owned completely by foreigners. So on our case, we each own 50% of our Mexican corporation. So you can think of the Mexican corporation like an LLC in the US. We're forming an LLC. We each own 50% of the LLC, the Mexican corporation. They call it a sociedad. So we own the corporation completely. Then the Mexican corporation can purchase land anywhere in Mexico, including the restricted zone. And for us, the corporation is also where we run our business. So the corporation purchases the land. The corporation built all the structures on the land. They are all owned by the corporation. And we use the corporation for all the revenue coming from pufferfish villas. You don't have to do that. So if you just want to buy a property through a corporation, you can buy the property, build on it, and all of that is owned by the corporation, and you own the corporation completely. This is another very safe way to own property in Mexico. It's protected by very strong laws in corporate law, and it would be the equivalent of people forming an LLC in the US and then buying property with that LLC, which people do all the time. Next, we're going to talk about taxes. I know nobody likes to talk about taxes. I don't like to talk about taxes, and especially not here in Mexico, because in Mexico, when you're a US citizen, you pay taxes to Mexico and the US. I'm going to read off my sheet here because there's so many taxes, and I want to make sure I get all this correct. I looked this up. So we pay all of our taxes. We have all of our licenses. We do everything above board, exactly how we're supposed to according to Mexico law. So here's what we pay on income that we get from our rentals. We have to pay Mexican IVA, which is their sales tax, 16% on all income that you make in Mexico. Goes directly to the SAT, it's called, which is the Mexican IRS. We also have to pay a Baja California Sur hotel tax of 4% on all our rentals. So 20% of our gross revenue from the rentals goes straight to taxes off the top before anything. Okay? Then there is the Mexican corporate tax. So on any profits we make on our corporation, the tax is 30% for Mexican corporate tax. And then we also, let me look, if we had any income, which the way our property is set up, we really don't have any income. Income tax in Mexico is from 2 to 35%. So that would be another tax you might have to pay. Property tax is very low in Mexico compared to the US, usually about 0.1%. So for example, our property taxes last year on this 1 acre property with our casitas, our pool, everything, our shop and our house up here was less than $200 for a year. So property taxes, very inexpensive in Mexico. Now, we also pay all of the licenses. So we have a city business license. We have a hotel license. We also have to pay for fire marshal inspection, which is once a year when you have a hotel. And then the fire marshal may give you all these things that you have to fix. So there's many expenses there that we have to do. They're not a lot, but it's a couple $100 a year for all the licenses and inspections that we need. So after you pay all these taxes in Mexico, guess what? If you're from the US, now you have to pay taxes in the US on that income too. So how it works basically is you have to pay your taxes in the US according to all the US rules and regulations on any income you make in Mexico and on property in Mexico. So the income that we make here from our rental, we have to pay taxes on it in the US legally, federal taxes. If you live in California or some other states, you have to pay state taxes on it too. So we have to pay California state tax on income that we make down here, 11%. No exemptions. Now the federal tax, you can get an exemption to that, and that is the foreign income exemption. And this year, I think it's $122,000. There are some requirements, like you have to be either a resident of the foreign country, or you have to have only been in the U.S. for less than 31 days in the calendar year. If you can prove that, you can get this foreign income exemption and write off the first $122,000 of income you make outside the U.S. Now, if you don't have that exemption or you make more than that, you have to pay taxes. And what they do is you get a write-off for all of the tax money you paid in Mexico. And then if that's not equal to your tax burden in the U.S. or more than it, then you have to pay the difference between what you paid in Mexico and what you would pay in the U.S. So basically, as a U.S. citizen living outside the U.S. making income, if you cannot get the exemption, you're going to pay the same taxes you would pay if you made that money in the U.S. Fun, isn't it? So now we're going to get into the big dogs. This is the one questions I get a lot. So the first one is medical in Mexico. What's medical like in Mexico? Can I get health insurance? Can I use my insurance from the U.S.? All these questions. Generally, if you are visiting Mexico as a tourist, you can usually use your medical insurance from the U.S. on an emergency basis. How that generally is going to work is you're going to pay for everything here in Mexico, you're going to go back to the U.S., and you're going to submit a claim for that, and they should cover those expenses. Now, if they think you're living in Mexico permanently, they're probably not going to pay those expenses. So can I get medical insurance in Mexico? Yes. There are several insurers in Mexico that are major insurers worldwide, like Cigna and Aetna. They provide medical insurance worldwide, and as long as you get the policy that is worldwide except the U.S., it is very inexpensive compared to the U.S. So when we looked at it, there was two policies available, basically a full coverage policy that worked in every country in the world except the U.S. That was about $250 to $350 a month, depending on your deductible. $350 gets you like a very low, like a $250 deductible, coverage for everything, emergency evacuation back to the U.S., everything. But they won't cover any medical expenses in the U.S. If you want to get insurance that covers everywhere else in the world and the U.S., you're probably $3,000 or $4,000 a month per person. What does it cost if you don't have insurance? Now, we don't have insurance here in Mexico because it really doesn't make sense. You know, we're very healthy, and the cost of just going to the doctor here in Mexico is not very much. Here's services in Loreto, Mexico. General visit to your doctor is going to be $10 to $30. And there are doctors that have monthly and yearly plans available, and they're cheap, like $25 a month, and you can go as many times as you want and talk to the doctor as much as you want. The other thing here is when you get a doctor, they give you their home phone number, they give you their email, and you can get in contact with them very quickly, easily if you have urgent questions. So there's a lot of access there. Also, doctors here really do put in a lot of effort and really do spend a lot of time with you and try to understand what's going on. They don't just throw a bunch of medication at you. They really want to try to solve the problem and help you get better. I would say the quality of the medical here is very comparable to the U.S. You can get everything done. The doctors that we have gone to are just as knowledgeable as any doctor we've ever had in the U.S., and we've been really happy with the medical service and the quality of it here. Now, what is it going to cost you for anything else? Specialists. Specialist visits are usually $20 to $50. Most of the time you can get into a specialist the same day or the next day. It's not like the U.S. where you're going to wait months for a specialist appointment. No. And then ER visits. ER visits are between like $25 and $125. I mean, you can go in with a full heart attack, be in there overnight, and you might walk out of there with a $60 bill for that entire service, all the medications, all the doctors, everything. So you aren't going to go to the ER and have a $30,000 bill when you walk out. Also, different imaging. Ultrasounds, we've had ultrasounds recently, $120 for a 45-minute ultrasound. CT scan, $300 for a partial body CT scan. These are all paying out of pocket with no insurance. So you can see the costs are just a fraction of what they are in the US. One other thing to note is that if you are a resident, you get free basic health care and emergency health care. So if you go to the emergency room, it isn't going to cost you anything if you are a permanent resident. That's kind of cool. Also, here in Loreto, we have general practitioners, we have a hospital, they have an emergency room, they do surgery here, and they deliver babies here. They do a lot of the general things. If you need different specialists, you may have to go to a bigger city because there just isn't all those specialists here in town. All right, now we come to the last one, which is a very hot topic this time, and that is safety in Mexico. Now, there's been some high-profile murders in Mexico just recently, and I don't know the details. I don't think anyone really knows all the details of this yet, so I'm not going to speak to that because I really don't know anything about that situation and what really happened there. What I will say is I'm going to speak to safety in Loreto, where we have been, and I can generally speak to most of Baja, where we have traveled. We feel very safe in Baja, all the places we've been, except maybe the major cities on the border, Tijuana and Mexicali. Some of those cities do have a higher crime rate, and you might not feel as safe there. But once you get down into Baja, we totally feel safe here. Now, we live in Loreto. Loreto is an extremely, extremely safe town, one of the safest towns in Mexico. The police have never stopped us, have never, hassled us in any way. The police here are fantastic. You wave to them, they smile. We've stopped and talked to a lot of the police here in the neighborhood, and they just like to tell you how they're coming by your house every hour during the night, and they're keeping an eye on it for you. And they do, because we have a camera out on the road for the front gate, and sometimes when I go look at that camera, I can see them. They come by like every hour or more, checking the property. So the police here are fantastic. We also have walked at night. We have a friend that's a single woman, and she has no problem walking around midnight around town. In fact, usually around town in the evening, in the late evening, especially in the summer when it's really hot, there'll be tons of families like in the center square of town. All the kids are playing together. They're running around. The parents don't really have to worry about it. They don't have to worry about the kids because they know that nothing's going to happen to them. And that's what we really love about here in Loreto. And, for us, it's we feel a lot safer than we did when we lived in the U.S. When we lived in the San Diego area, there was much more crime than this. Of course, there was lots of murders every single year. There was gunshots on a regular basis. At night, you would hear them when you're in bed. You always have the police helicopter going around, and you just don't see any of that here. I'm not trying to say there is no crime here in Loreto or in Baja California Sur or anything in Mexico. Of course there is. Every place is going to have a criminal element. Most big cities have bad areas of town and very good areas of town. Most countries have cities that have a crime problem and cities that are extremely, extremely safe. So I'm not trying to say that Mexico is totally safe and you can go anywhere in Mexico. Would I go to Juarez and walk around at night, see Juarez? Probably not. You'll probably be putting yourself in a very dangerous situation there. But would I go to parts of LA and walk around in the night? Probably not, because you're putting yourself into a very dangerous situation. So the fact that we live in a very safe area that we've chosen. And, you know, if you choose an area and you do your research and you find that it's safe, it's got a history of being a safe place to live, I would not be worried at all about living in Mexico or your safety here. Okay, I hope that I answered a lot of your burning questions, and hopefully this will make it easier for you to decide if maybe you want to check out Mexico for a place to live. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't. And never forget to live before you die.